Hey Sopranos fans, welcome to another episode here on Bully Whispers, and we are here today to take a look at Law 27 of Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, play on people's need to believe to create a cult-like following. Now, this will probably be a fairly short episode since it's only 5 steps and a lot of it is taken care of by the mob structure itself. Remember, Tony isn't creating a cult, he's inheriting one, but nevertheless there are quite a few interesting connections to be made. Before digging into the individual steps, however, we should address why this dynamic works in general. According to Greene, people have a desperate need to believe in something, and in the absence of organized religion, it becomes easier for a person or group to fill that void. Now, clearly they have organized religion. Catholicism is shown throughout the show, but none of them really seem to believe in it, so it's not quite the same. But that's a different discussion altogether. Anyways, this need to believe is attached to an innate inability to endure long periods of doubt, which proved to be Sill's biggest problem during his short stint at the top, as well as one of Tony's biggest strengths.
More is lost by indecision than a wrong decision.
I tell you, though, when I first met him, decisive as he is, I would have been proud to call him my own son.
However, when being that type of leader, it's important not to forget step 1. Keep it vague, keep it simple. Most people's problems have complex causes, deep-rooted neuroses, interconnected social factors, roots that go way back in time and are exceedingly hard to unravel. Few people, however, have the patience to deal with this. Most just want to hear a simple solution that will solve their problems.
Your only problem in life now is you give me 10 points you take every settle-up day. Other than that, you got no problem. When you think of all the headaches most human beings have in life, odds are all boiled down to only one. Not a bad deal, huh?
So, instead of the complicated explanations of real life, revert to the primitive solutions of our ancestors.
But the truth is, they bring certain modes of conflict resolution from all the way back in the old country. From the poverty of the Mezzogiorno, where all higher authority was corrupt.
Now, it's important to note here that Greene does imply that this is a tightrope to walk. If you are too vague, you will have no credibility, and even worse, if you are too specific about the benefits of following you, then you will be expected to fulfill them to the letter. Just keep it to vague, simple promises of better things to come with no specific timeline.
Why don't you cheer up? One day some kid will be paying for your dinners.
Of course, the larger the group, the more they will feed on each other's enthusiasm, and after enough time together in a world of vagueness, especially in a moral sense, it will allow people to make their own connections and interpretations based on what they want them to be.
We're soldiers, Soldiers don't go to hell. It's war. Soldiers, they kill other soldiers.
And this brings us to step 2. Emphasize the visual and sensational over the intellectual. This one is fairly self-evident, as the visual/sensational is the primary appeal of the mob lifestyle, money, women, power, etc., and Tony is pretty good at this. I mean, even most of the women he's hooked up with fall for him despite knowing they would never be anything more than a side chick.
I'm not quite sure how something that's just a little tiny prick can be so powerful.
Now, once you have a following, Greene notes that you will face 2 main challenges. Boredom, which may cause people to start to look elsewhere, and distance, which will allow people to start thinking rationally, both of which I will examine through 2 examples, Vito and Little Carmine. Both Vito and Little Carmine had some distance, at least briefly, to allow contemplation. Little Carmine had something else, namely his wife, to step in and fill the void, whereas Vito really didn't have anything. As a result, Vito couldn't resist the excitement and returned.
Bullshit. It was the fucking life you couldn't live without. The gambling, the money, who knows what else?
Even though, realistically, he had to know it wouldn't end well. Little Carmine, on the other hand, comes as close to getting out as we see anyone in the show. If you want to take this outside of the underworld, it's arguable that the distance is also what helps Dr. Kupferberg see what Tony is doing more clearly than Melfi, who is knee-deep in the trenches, so to speak. Step 3. Borrow the forms of organized religion to structure the group. Create rituals for your followers, organize them into a hierarchy, ranking them in grades of sanctity, and give them names and titles with religious-sounding overtones.
Are you sure you want to do this? I feel a lot better with the Pope's blessing.
Ask them for sacrifices that will fill your coffers and increase your power.
Family comes before everything else. Everything. Before your wife, and your children, and your mother, and your father.
Which is pretty much all they do. Step 4, disguise your source of income. Now, this is an interesting one in a mob context because they have to do this for legal purposes, but in order to maintain the flashy appeal required in Step 2, they have to have some level of legitimate income. In the context that Greene uses it, it means don't let your followers know that it's all from them, but in this case, they already know that. The key then becomes making them believe it could be them one day, which we see Tony doing with Chris throughout the show. Lastly, we have Step 5. Set up an us versus them dynamic. This is one that Tony himself actually doesn't do that often, although the show does. Of course, there is the constant threat of law enforcement, but other than the early series, Us versus Junior Crew, and the late series, Us versus New York, the majority of the conflicts are Tony versus, such as Tony versus Richie, Tony versus Ralphie, even Tony versus his own mother, etc. For those of you who've made it this far, thank you, and like I said, this is a short episode, largely because Tony inherits, he doesn't create, but also because all of these points are done much more specifically in Greene's other laws, so my focus will be on those chapters as well. Well, thanks for watching this episode here on Bully Whispers. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.